Hello, everyone, and welcome to another FNPS Lunch and Learn. Today, we have a great Lunch and Learn planned for you guys about our land management review process. And it will be led by this panel here. If they can introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Lily Anderson Messick. I'm the Director of North Florida Programs for the Florida Native Plant Society. And previously, our land management reviews, which we're about to go into depth with you about what they are and how they proceed, were run mostly by volunteers, members. And now the state has taken charge in trying to be more proactive and more dedicated to this very important role that we play in land management reviews. And so I am now currently in charge of the land management review of assigning reviewers across the state. And we're really trying to build the program to make it work more as effectively as possible so we can make as much effective, positive change on the management of our public lands as possible. So we're gonna go around and just introduce our co-hosts here. Athena, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Athena Phillips. I'm with Citrus Chapter, and I'm on the Florida Native Plant Society Board of Directors. I've participated in land management reviews since about 2016 across different agencies such as DEP and Florida Forests and FWC and SWIFMUD.
Thanks, Athena. Walter?
I'm Walter Bryant. I am in the Ixia chapter, which covers the 4 counties in the extreme northeast corner of Florida. I'm the chapter secretary, newsletter editor, website administrator, volunteer hour reporter, LMR participant, and basically anything else no one else will want to do. And my first LMR was in 2013, and I have done, I would say, over 20 LMRs since then.
Great, thanks. Danny?
Hi everyone, Danny Young with the Pawpaw chapter. I was the LMR review coordinator, like what Lily's doing now. In the probably late 2000s, I took that over from Ann Cox, who had started this program for us. And so I was responsible for getting folks onto the statewide list of reviews, and I've attended several land management reviews and prepared some land management plans. So fairly familiar with the process.
Thanks, Danny. And Rob?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I'm Rob Williams. I'm a new board member for the Magnolia chapter, and I have participated in one of the recent land management reviews, and I've also participated in the past on the approval of land management plans.
Thanks.
I guess I've done a number of other reviews in the past as well. I guess Three Rivers and
yeah, you do have quite a bit of experience.
So.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and let Walter give the presentation he has prepared all about the review process, what they are, and our role in it. And go ahead and take it away, Walter.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, land management reviews, LMR for short. You want to say LMR, that way people will know that you're an in the know kind of person. So I appreciate you scheduling a lunch and learn for land management reviews because it's a little known but a very important function that the society plays. Florida has over 4 million acres of state-owned conservation land that's spread out over 480 parks, preserves, forests, wildlife management areas, historic sites, recreation areas, which are managed by a number of different agencies. This morning, I was actually looking on the internet and found that Florida actually has over 10 million acres of conservation land, not only owned by the state, they're in the military bases, the national forest and national parks, local and county governments, a lot of conservation land in the state of Florida. In fact, it ranked 14th in the total conservation land in the country. The other 13 states were all in the West. along the Rocky Mountains and in that area. But Florida is the state, and the only state, or the first ranked state on the East Coast with the number of conservation areas. Nearly all of the public lands require some form of responsible management, some form of stewardship. And stewardship just happens to be one of the core values of the society, responsibly acting as a voice for conserving and restoring native plants and their habitats. So the mission of the society meshes quite nicely with the Department of Environmental Protection, because it's their primary job to be the stewards and of the conservation lands that the state own, in collaboration with the managing agencies. So it's a nice fit for the Florida Native Plant Society to participate in land management reviews. There are a number of managing agencies that actually manage and operate and perform the stewardship function. Perhaps the largest is the Division of Recreation and Parks. The Florida Park Service would be the largest department that would probably have the most properties that they would manage. Florida Greenways and Trails, Florida Forest Service, FWC has the wildlife management areas. The Florida Resilience and Coastal Protection Department has the aquatic preserves. Division of Historic Resources has properties, and the water management districts actually manage some of the state-owned lands, as well as local governments. So what is an LMR plan? An LMR plan is required for all state-owned conservation lands. After acquisition, a land management plan must be submitted within 1 year, and that plan must be updated and resubmitted every 10 years, or after there are any changes in the proposed use of the land. So a land management plan will sometimes it will have a really pretty cover sheet with a picture, with a nice picture. Other times it will just be a plain page with the headings on it. But what's in a land management plan? Well, there's some boilerplate stuff: property, the purpose of the property, the mission of the management, the acquisition history of the property. In many cases, the property is acquired in pieces over a period of time. The plan will state the goals and objectives for managing the property, and then subsequent plans will mention their accomplishments of how those goals and objectives have been met. There'll be things like legal descriptions, proximity to other public lands, any concerns about adjacent land, including adjacent lands that the property thinks should be purchased and added to their site. Gates, boundaries surveyed, and then surplus land assessment. It's there are surplus lands. It's a bigger issue now. It probably came on the scene maybe 10 years ago as the politics in the state changed a little from acquiring lands to perhaps disposing of some of the land. So it's surplus land assessment is something that has to be mentioned in all land management plans. Fortunately, in most cases, the agencies say we have no surplus land, which makes me feel good. Resource management, this is probably the area that you would focus on in your review of the management plan and during the land management reviews. Certainly the natural communities, that goes to the core of what the agencies manage in the properties. Some sites can have 3 or 4 natural communities, others can have a dozen or more. Plant and animal species, of course, that is something that we in the society would be especially concerned about. Very important is protecting the cultural and archaeological resources. Those are identified on the site and mentioned in the land management plans, and they get very special protection. Public access and recreation, of course, that is pretty much required on all public lands. Money, the state can't spend all that money buying lands and then just keep it private. So we get to benefit from the access to the property and all the recreational events we can have on the properties. Infrastructure management, the roads, the buildings, the equipment, topography, geology and soils, hydrology. And then is there any other uses of the property to consider? So that's all part of the resource management. And then a very important part of the plans, especially in the Forest Service, but not necessarily strictly Forest Service, even in the parks, timber management and prescribed fire is a very important part of managing the properties. Just historically, when did the property burn? What time of the year? How often did it burn? So prescribed burns is something that will be described in detail in many of the land management plans, and you will hear a lot about prescribed burns on a land management review. You'll hear such terms as fire return intervals, growing and dormant season burns, wildlife prevention, sustainable forestry, and timber inventory and sales. Our forest in most of our forests are actually in the business of growing timber to sell. Some of our forests actually cover their entire cost from timber sales and can return surplus funds to the state for management for use on all of the conservation lands, thinning, reforestation. So brush up on, if you don't know much about prescribed fire, do some Google searches and brush up on the importance of prescribed fire. Land management reviews. Reviews are required on public lands greater than 1,000 acres. They must have a review every 5 years. That was effective in 2003. Up until 2003, it was all properties. Lands less than 1,000 acres can still be reviewed, and DEP has occasionally reviewed such sites in the past when there's been some concerns. Advisory groups are required for management plans for sites that are greater than 160 acres. That's up to the managing agency of the property of how they want to work with their management groups. But those advisory groups would, I think, to some extent replace the land management reviews. And then for sites under 160 acres, land managers are encouraged to get advice from the public, but it's really up to their discretion how they want to go about doing it. Implementation of the LMR teams, it was enacted, it started in 1997. And at that point, I think in 1997, the state had so much public land, they say, is it being managed properly? So the statute was enacted in 1997 to direct the DEP to establish teams to and evaluate if the property is being managed for the purpose for which it was acquired and in accordance with the existing management plan. You will hear Keith say that at the start of every land management review. A report of the LMR findings is given to the appropriate managing agency and to other state departments. The agency must respond to any concerns raised in the report. Essentially, every LMR I've been on, the agency, there are not necessarily concerns, but questions, and the agencies were very good about responding to those, and those responses are sent out to the LMR team. If the LMR team determines the property is not being managed accordingly, then the agency, I guess you could say they're in trouble. They need to report their reasons for managing the property as it has been managed. So what's the purpose? It's exactly what I just said. For the purpose it was acquired, including public access. There are really 4 key components that are that are specified specifically in the statute. The protection should be should include threatened and endangered species, unique and important natural and physical features, the natural communities, archaeological and cultural features, and geological and hydrological functions. Those are four key components that the managing agencies must make sure that sufficient protection is applied. But the LMR team can review anything they want to. When the team goes in there, the entire property is available for their review. Who is on an LMR team? There are 8 members. The Department of Environmental Protection District Office will send a representative. Florida Forest Service, FWC, the Department of Recreation and Parks District Office, a soil and the area soil and water conservation district or water management district. Local or county government sends a representative, a local private land manager or an owner, and us, a conservation organization. Sometimes the county government doesn't send anyone. Sometimes there's not a local land manager or owner, but the other 6, including the society, generally has a representative on every one of the LMRs. Your typical itinerary looks like this. You meet on the site. The participants may receive a booklet of the tour stops and maps and charts of burns and other information. You go around, you make introductions. Keith will recite the statement of purpose for the LMR. He has done so many, he probably wakes up in the middle of the night, starts reciting it. Presentation from the management team. Then you start the field tour. Oftentimes, or I would say usually on a field tour, you will take a break and have lunch. So you typically will want to carry a lunch when you participate. And then when it's over, you have a team review discussion, and the most important part, which is preparing the checklist to score the plan and what you saw on your field tour. An LMR can take 1 to 2 full days. So let's walk through a typical LMR with some visuals. You typically start in the meeting. This would be where you would have your introductions, the statement of the purpose, the presentation from the management team. And then you pile into several state-owned vehicles, oftentimes Ford Explorers, and you go driving through the woods. Sometimes you even get to drive along the beach. Sometimes you even ride a bicycle out to some of the stops, or even ride a boat. Sometimes you have to walk a short distance to the stop. At the stops, you will have someone from the managing agency, or we'll talk about what you're looking at, what has been done in this area. This was, I think, a restoration area we were looking at. You'll look at a lot of burn areas. You'll see, in fact, in one LMR I did a few years ago, we actually drove right through the middle of a fire that was in process. Rather exciting and scary. You'll see plants. You'll see things from little diminutive little sundews. You may see fields of vanilla leaf or liatris. You may even see rare endemic wildflowers, such as this Bartram's Ixia, which is the namesake of the Ixia chapter, which is only found in a handful of locations in Northeast Florida. You may see some wildlife, even little tiny rodents like this little endemic rodent and that you find only in Anastasia Island State Park in St. Augustine. And then prior to COVID, we were back in the office where we did the checklist. More recently, since COVID, Keith has changed it to participation with Microsoft Teams now. So you all sign into Microsoft Teams, you do the whole discussion, the review, fill out the checklist, scan, photograph the checklist, send it to Keith. It has worked out a lot simpler. The participants can all go home and have more time to think about their reviews, actually. A typical checklist is about 6 pages. The first page will typically have the natural communities. This one had a lot of natural communities. Obviously, on one this large, you would probably never really visit all of those, particularly some of them like the bogs and the depression marshes and the cypress domes may only be a few acres. So the next section would list any species that the park has listed for protection. But the last page is perhaps the most important page. The very bottom are the 2 questions you have to answer that sums up your entire participation in the LMR. Is the land being managed for the purpose it was acquired, or management practices, including public access, in compliance with the management plan? Those are the 2 most important questions that you have to answer. The checklist gives you an opportunity in the notes section to make personal comments about what you saw. Those comments can be things recommended for improvement, comments about things you want to think have been done well, but the group as a whole can also make recommendations and commendations. The recommendations would be someone in the meeting would propose a recommendation. You take a vote, and if everyone or the majority of the people think it's a good recommendation, then it gets put on the list. Same thing with commendations. Someone in the meeting can say, this agency has done a really good job of protecting this rare endemic wildflower. And you get a majority vote from the other team members, and it goes onto the commendation sheet. A few weeks, well, probably a couple of months after the review, you will receive the team report. It will be a draft. It will be an opportunity for you to review the results of the LMR. You have an opportunity to respond to Keith before it's finalized and sent up the chain. So to participate in an LMR, and Lily will go into this perhaps in more detail, but the schedule is typically published in May or June. The schedule for 24-25 is out on the DEP website. Lily starts reaching out to the chapters and her regular contacts to recruit volunteers. If she cannot find volunteers in the chapter, she'll reach out to nearby chapters or even statewide. I have driven to Central Florida to participate in some of the LMRs. So if you're interested in participating, let your chapter president or chapter rep know, or contact Lily directly. After you volunteer to participate in an LMR, Lily will send your name and email address to Keith. He will add you as a member of the team, and shortly before the review date, you will receive an email with a link to a folder where you will find the itinerary, current management plan, review checklist, and other pertinent documents to download and review prior to the review date. After you've been assigned, go ahead and start doing your homework. You don't have to wait for Keith's email. You can, all of the management plans are out on the internet. Learn about natural habitats and prescribed fire. And you're expected to evaluate all aspects of the review, not just conservation of the plant species, You are one of the team members, so you will have an opportunity to put your score on the checklist for everything you see. A couple of resources you may want to look at. Just the DEP page. Just do an internet search for Florida DEP land stewardship. That's where much of my content in this presentation came from. If you want to learn about natural communities, I recommend you go to FNAI, Florida Natural Area Inventory. They have very detailed descriptions of natural communities. They have a nice booklet you can purchase. Prescribed fire. It's not really one really good resource I found to recommend, but just spend some time searching for prescribed fire on the internet, and you'll find plenty of resources. And final slide, just a little advertisement for our chapter. If you notice down in the lower right-hand corner, we have a button to subscribe to a conservation newsletter. We publish a weekly conservation newsletter that addresses not only Northeast Florida, but the entire state, sometimes national issues. So it's something you may want to subscribe to and to follow conservation issues in the state of Florida. So if you have an opportunity to participate in an LMR, you'll be doing your part to help with the conservation of our public lands and fulfilling one of FNPS core values. And thank you for letting me make this presentation.
Thank you so much, Walter. That was an excellent review of the review process. And so as many of you know, conservation is not just about acquiring and preserving land, right? It's about land management. That is probably one of the most critical aspects of conservation, is adequately managing our land. And so when we're looking for a reviewer, and we're so lucky, like Walter mentioned, only 8 people attend these reviews, and we are so lucky to have the opportunity to be one of those 8 people. We really want someone who is knowledgeable about fire ecology, especially because that is so important to the management of our public lands, as well as the native natural communities in that region, and the fire return intervals. This is all stuff you can research, and those resources are excellent that Walter provided. But having a knowledge of those things beforehand is ideal. We also are really encouraging our reviewers to bring an observer, which we are allowed to bring 1 observer on the field tour, and have them attend the checklist meeting as well, because we want to try to mentor and cultivate future reviewers to walk them through the process so that they can learn as well. And there are a lot of aspects that we want to be aware of and address when we're attending a review. Invasive plant species, threatened and endangered species, even well, many other things, but I'll go ahead and stop talking and let Athena and Danny have any words, and Rob have any additions that they would like to add to Walter's presentation.
Yeah, I just wanted to encourage people, because I'm not a botanist. I don't have degrees in environmental sciences, but I do have a keen interest in the interconnectedness of habitats and plant communities, especially the Central Florida plant communities. And I have some general knowledge of land management too, from volunteering at some of the local conservation sites. So these are all things that you can gain from some of the resources that Walter mentioned earlier. I'll also mention that the Florida Association of Native Nurseries has some summaries of plant communities that are broken down across the state, because sometimes a coastal hammock in Miami is going to be different from a coastal hammock in my neck of the woods in the Nature Coast. And I'll even also mention that the University of Florida helps people, private landowners, with their own land management plans. So you can also participate in that way. This wouldn't be part of our system, but you could get familiar with land management plans and do your own part for conservation on private lands as well.
Danny, is there anything you would like to?
Yeah, I would just say if you are attending, first, I really like the observer part. It used to be 8 people, and it was 8 people no matter what. It took that observer thing as a special thing for FNPS, so they understand the importance of us mentoring the next person. And you do learn a lot if you're interested and unsure. You learn a lot as an observer. You learn a lot about land management going on the management reviews, so it's quite educational. All those 6 other folks are asking really good questions. And then the other thing that I've always stressed was you are reviewing it against the land management plan. Those last 2 questions that Walter pointed out, against the land management plan and the purpose it was acquired. So if it was acquired for hunting, then it needs to be used for hunting if that was the purpose. And if the management plan says, treat your pine flatwoods in this manner, then that's the manner that you address it. So one of the important things is once you've done a management review, first, you're an excellent candidate for the next one 5 years from now because you've seen it. You'll see that process. And the other thing is that'll get you potentially onto the management plan advisory group. And that is where you can really make a lot of impact. If you think the park isn't being managed quite ecologically the way you want to see it, that management plan is where those changes come about. And then that is what directs the actual management that happens on the ground and what you're reviewing against.
Yeah, the advisory groups are really where we get to put in our influence on how the land is actually being managed. The land manager reviews are holding the managers accountable for the plan and are they managing it according to their plan. But yeah, the advisory group is where we really get to have more influence. I'm on one advisory group in my region. And the other thing is, when I'm looking for a reviewer, I first reach out to the local chapter in the area because we really want to encourage our local members to build and cultivate relationships with the land managers in their area. And this is the best way for them to advocate for those land managers who sometimes do not have the resources necessary to meet the goals of their management plan. Often, in the case of fire, they are not able to, get the staff, get the funding, et cetera, in order to meet the recommended fire return intervals for some of their habitats. Rob, is there anything you would like to add? You've got to unmute yourself. Oh, there you are. Great.
I have a lot to add, I guess. I think it's really interesting to look at the size of the park that's being reviewed. In the Panhandle, most of these parks are small. There's 39 parks in the Panhandle, and most of them are under 500 acres. But there are some parks that are quite large, and I think that's where we really need to focus most on sort of preparation, because you're not going to see the Torreya Park is 13,000 acres. It's 20 square miles. So you're not going to see most of the park on the tour. And that means that so that's one issue. And how do I think you should review or prepare? I think the first thing you should prepare for is that the first question on the checklist involves the natural communities. And the question for the field review is, how much of the areas, the natural communities, are in maintenance conditions? And the checklist doesn't spell it out, and it wasn't spelled out at the field trip level. What are they talking about? What is the maintenance condition? In order to determine what the maintenance condition is, you have to go back to the plan and look to it's not called the maintenance condition in the plan. It's called the desired condition, which is how it should look when it's properly maintained. And quite frankly, I didn't see any fire maintained habitat on the tour that we did that was anywhere close to maintenance condition. And that's really because the fire goals, the prescribed burn goals, have not been met. And I think this is likely to turn up on many, many plans, the same issue over and over. As Lee said,
Definitely, yeah.
don't have the resources to do the prescribed burning that's called for, and the result reflected in the state of the natural communities. So,
and
for example,
they won't get the resources if we don't score them properly. So it's kind of like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You know, if they're not meeting the management plan, we have to rate them poorly, you know, which can be difficult, especially if you have a personal relationship with the land managers. But they need, it needs to be adequately reflected so that those resources are, you know, passed down in order for them to meet that management plan.
and I think that goes back to the other element of preparation that I think is sort of critical. We need to review what the maintenance conditions are, what the desired conditions are, and what the natural communities are, and particularly the fire maintained natural communities. And then in advance of the tour, we need to get the burn reports. We need to ask for the burn reports for the park. And in the case of the one I just did, those reports weren't really provided until after we had the review meeting, the checklist meeting. And there wasn't, and they told a very different story than what the park manager said. The park manager, since we hadn't seen most of the park.
Rob, we do need to kind of move forward in Walter, do you want to address any of what he said about the maintenance and burn plan and getting a burn plan?
Well, some of the management plans will have a nice description of what they determine the maintenance condition is. But for a more detailed description, I would go to the Florida Natural Areas Inventory website where you can get very detailed.
Yeah, they usually have the fire return intervals ready.
Right. Yeah,
on
fire return interval. And also the other important factor in natural habitats are the plants that are typically found in those habitats. So one thing that I look at is I try to see does this habitat, like maybe 5 or 6 plants are typical of this habitat? Am I seeing those?
Yeah.
Or if I don't see them, am I asking the land managers, are those plants in this habitat to the best of your knowledge? So it's the return interval, and it's also the
species composition.
Plants.
Yeah. So should we move forward to the questions? Val, do you want to pose some questions? Or yeah.
Just real quick, if you do score low on those habitats, which happens probably more often than not because we're still getting caught up from years of no fire, we're in that process. You can see that places are getting better over time. But if you score it, less than a 3 on that checklist, it is an objective score. The manager has to write a response in the review report for each item that was less than a 3. So a lot of times it is just very objective, and it's just tracking what's going on. So as Lily said, you probably know the people there, you've probably spent time there, but it's important to keep objective, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just tracking what it is.
Yes.
And the only way it's a bad thing, and it has happened, is if those last 2 questions are answered no. And that's happened in places where the manager didn't understand what they were in charge of, usually at a local level or something like that. So everything is very, very objective, and you're not stepping on toes. The harder questions you ask, the better it is, the more everyone's informed. So just wanted to add that in there.
Great. Thank you, Danny. Athena, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, I feel really bad that happened to Rob, because that hasn't been my experience. The information that I get has always been really thorough and sent ahead of time. but it is part of the job. The amount of information that you'll get sent before the review, it takes about a day to go through. So that is another period of time that you would have to volunteer. But, you know, actually, to anybody that's watching this, I would really recommend, since the unit management plans are available online, to go and find one to a local site that's in your area, just so you can get familiar. I had a really eye-opening experience when I looked at the Withlacoochee Forest management plan that I was looking at for another reason. I've never done the review for that site, just to find out the information on what they're supposed to care for. They were actually supposed to help with a local county park that I didn't know about, so I was trying to facilitate a little bit of interaction between those two agencies after I learned about that. So I would recommend, just out of curiosity's sake, everybody go and look up the unit management plan.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great, Athena. All right, so let's move on to some questions.
Yes, so I would say the burning question is from Randy Snyder and Mary Kime is, who is Keith?
Oh, we didn't introduce Keith. Yeah, do you want to take that, Walter?
Keith Singleton, he is the he worked for the Department of Environmental Protection in Tallahassee. I don't know his exact title, but he is the coordinator, scheduler, facilitator, everything related to keeping an LMR running. He starts from the beginning with when he gets the names of the people who will participate. He puts together the package to send out to them. On the site, he makes his introductions. He keeps the process moving. He goes through all the checklist. When he gets back in Tallahassee, puts together the management report. So he has been involved the entire. He has run the LMR process as long as I've been involved in doing these, and he's wonderful human being.
He is great. He does an excellent job at what he does, and he was in a few photos that Walter shared, but we probably should add a slide just introducing Keith to your presentation, maybe. But yeah, Keith is in charge of overseeing all land management reviews, and he's our contact for FDEP. So
yeah, he loved he loved the boat ride, but we all got drenched that day. She was really speeding that boat down the intercoastal waterway.
These field tours are actually really fun if you like being out. You know, most of us like to be outside and be looking at plants, and it is an excellent opportunity to get to see some of the really nice choice sites on some of the lands in your region. And so I have really enjoyed all of the land management reviews that I've gotten to attend. They've all been really fun. Next question, maybe?
Yeah, whoever's running the ICSIA chapter YouTube login says that it's program consultant. His title is program consultant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, anyways. So our first main question was from Cynthia Holler, and it has to do with the surplus lands programs. She asked, do these surplus lands tend to get sold to developers?
I don't know the answer to that. Do you know, Walter?
Well, yeah, I mean, the surplus lands can be sold to anyone. I'm on a mailing list, and about once a month I see an email come in that's saying surplus land has been identified, it's up for sale. It's I don't know the process of how the agencies or the state determines if it's surplus. I do know, for example, on one review I went to, it was a very large tract, and there were two major roads and come to an intersection, and there was one corner that they said that could be surplus land. They really didn't need it, but it was an intersection where they really could use like a service station or something, and they said, we could consider that. We could consider that service land because people have been approaching us about that corner. So there are legitimate reasons for land, but in terms of taking an entire forest or park and saying this property is surplus, here, take it and develop it. I don't think that's happening.
Okay. Next
Yeah,
question.
surplus is generally towards just across the board state-owned property, so not just managed lands. So you see a lot of just state-owned properties like Walter was saying that are not really part of a management program and just sort of sitting there, not
Unmanaged.
really, yeah, doing anything from the conservation side of things. For whatever that's worth. And then they go out to private bid. It's almost an auction style. So it's probably a developer, but it doesn't,
Yeah.
it's not
Whoever
like
pays.
it's right.
All right. Next question.
Next question. Brenda Briel asks, what happens if it no longer makes sense to manage the property as originally planned? For example, if a wetland naturally dries up.
I don't know how they address that in the plan. I would think that they probably redelineate, you know, the natural habitat or the natural community.
What was the question again?
Well, it was because the idea of the land management reviews is to rate how the land is being managed according to a plan based on what the natural communities are at a certain time. And so I think what she's getting at is what happens if the natural communities change, you know, in a natural way? How does that affect the land management review process?
Well, natural habitats do change, and we talk about that quite often in land management reviews. A sandhill can perhaps transition into a hardwood forest, and it happens quite frequently. So the agencies address that. Do they want to stop that transition, or do they just have to accept that transition? So it's just part of the natural process that, well, not necessarily natural, but it's usually the result of just the huge amount of disturbance that we've had in our lands. Every piece of property out there, except maybe some isolated areas and some military reserves, have been disturbed through logging and timber harvesting. So I'm not sure that answers the question.
Well, and
I would say
oh,
that
sorry.
I would say that gets addressed during the 10-year advisory group review when you review what the plan is and you suggest alterations to the plan and how they're going to proceed managing it in the future. It also depends on the reason why the circumstances of the change. So like if a wetland has dried up, is it because of water flow changes because a road was built? Is it because there's been too many groundwater withdrawals and, you know, one agency has to petition the local water management district? There's too many, you know, withdrawals. Is it something more like salt marsh is being converted into mangroves because it's getting warmer and mangroves are, you know, moving in? So the circumstances would probably dictate whether or not the management plan stays as it is with some stronger recommendations for managing that or if it's something that actually needs to be changed because there's nothing we can do about it.
One area where this comes up is that in many parks, we have areas that are currently in pine plantation, and generally the plans include a restoration element, which is that the park's long-term objective is to restore that pine plantation to the original forest, whether it be sandhill or mesic flatwoods. So I think that it comes in there where we want to be vigilant to see that they actually are in the process of restoring land to its former state.
All right, next question, Beth.
Yes. M. Hamilton asks, who is the representative for Northwest Florida, Escambia and Santa Rosa County?
There's no like representative for a region. I'm not so I'm in charge of overseeing the land management reviews, and when I you know, get the plan comes in from FDEP, and I reach out to the local chapters and I send an email to the chapters and I say, we have these land management reviews coming up in your area. Do you have anybody who can fill this bill, you know, who would fit this, be a good reviewer? And then I hear back from the chapters, or sometimes I don't. And then I start reaching out to individuals, usually if I don't hear back, individuals that I know within the chapters or people I know in the area that I think would be a good might be a good fit. Or I reach out to someone who might know somebody, you know, and so there's no real like representative for different regions.
Awesome, thanks, Lily. Sonia Guidry points out an issue that I've come across is when water management districts or other agencies hold reviews. Keith Singleton and DEP don't seem to be involved, and those LMRs are only for one day.
Well, the water management districts perform their own LMRs. Up here is the St. Johns River Water Management District. So they have their own process, and it's similar but different, but it still fulfills the mission of having the review done. And the St. Johns River Water Management District, that river goes all the way to Central Florida. So Christopher is their coordinator, and he reaches out to me for anything up here in Northeast Florida. He has other contacts further south. And as far as the other agencies, I don't know, but I know the water management districts do, or at least the St. Johns River Water Management District does perform their own LMRs.
Right, so FNPS is not currently involved in organized land management reviews outside of the DEP program.
Correct. Yeah.
No, that's we get emails from the management reviewers.
It's usually like individuals
The
within the
chapters.
chapter that,
Right.
that have relationships that get emails. Because, I mean, it'd be great. I guess that would be something that might be good if we, you know, start building that relationship more. But
And get more
sometimes those,
volunteers.
you know, I don't want to step on any toes too, because sometimes those chapters have already established, you know, relationships with those managers, and so, but that is something we probably should look into.
And St. Johns River, he prior to me taking over the local chapter of the Florida Trail Association is who they reached out to represent the conservation organization. So they have their own plans, and I think we have our hands full just handling with the one from DEP.
It is a bit of work. Yeah.
Right.
Next question.
We have time for 2 more questions, and they're pretty good. We have them so far. Brandy Steiner Mary Kime asks, is there typically a discussion of mowing schedule or mosaic mowing? Because some conservation lands mow large fields of wildflowers or all of a power line easement all at once, making it rough on pollinators.
I've never been on a review where they mowed an area, so it's always been managed by fire. Have any of you guys?
Not mowing, but as far as burning goes, most of my most recent ones, they've been actively trying to do warm season burning
Yeah.
to, you know, coincide with the natural burn cycle that was, you know, established for, you know,
Fire
wildfires.
seasonality is a critical component to fire ecology in Florida, as I think hopefully our reviewers know. And so, and usually in my experience on the reviews I've attended, they are pretty good at knowing, you know, when to burn. And they have seemed really kind of up to date as to trying their best to do growing season burns. But all of our you know, fire ecology, or all of our lands have issues with burning in the growing season, often because there's a lack of burners. There's a lack of staff to burn during that season, because it's also the season when wildfires are taking off in the west, and a lot of the certified burners are ending up getting pulled out west, and they have staffing issues, and then there's other considerations as well, but they do tend to aim for growing season burns.
And I think the question also asked about mowing and power lines, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the many of the properties I have been on, the power lines go right through there, and under power lines are wonderful places to find wildflowers, and it's just wonderful. And our rare little Bartram's ixia thrives under a power line in a preserve in Clay County. But yeah, they do mow those typically instead of burning, because they are under power lines. And we have had discussions, and I have expressed concern that can they mow in the dormant season when people aren't coming out to look at the wildflowers? And the managers do communicate with the power line companies about the maintenance under the lines, and so they are aware of the issues and the concerns.
And our last question.
Yes, last question. Clara Mullins asks, do the teams reviewing the properties stay the same and review the same lands year over year?
The same
Yeah.
what?
Do the teams remain the same and review the same lands year after year? So
Oh, no.
no, it's not. I mean, they're often, especially with the, forest staff and there are often people who are attending the same reviews, or like Walter is a very experienced reviewer in his region in the northeast part of the state. And so he's probably been attending many of the same reviews year after year. And that is ideal. Like even Danny mentioned it, once you have attended a review once, you are the best person to do it again because you have experience. And you are going to be able to see the changes that they've made from the last time you were there. But not always. So sometimes people move or they leave, it's just not always the same people. No.
Yeah, up here, I think some of the offices have people that sort of their primary person to do. I would say most every review I've been on, it's people I know. There'll be at least one or two people on every, now that I've been doing so many, there'll be at least one or two people, especially from FWC and the Forest Service, that tend to regularly come out.
Any other questions?
I think that's outside of our scope.
Yeah, I don't. There, I mean, it's, yeah, no, I don't know. I don't think so. No, but I would say that I have run into some issues because our lands are used for hunters as well. And one of the issues I've run into is feed plots, them putting out feed plots for hunters, which are usually non-native species and sometimes can be even invasive species. And so I always try, if they're doing feed plots, I try to recommend that one, they just use, good fire maintenance, and you have a better herbaceous layer of plants that will feed, deer and other, wildlife they're hunting. And if they have to do feed plots, planting native species is always preferable. And then also, I have noticed some tensions between with hog management, because the land managers are supposed to manage for the invasive feral hogs, right? But then they sometimes get complaints from hunters that where are the hogs, because they want to hunt the hogs. And so I think it's our responsibility to remind them that the hogs are, the priority should be removing them. It's almost impossible to eradicate them, but we should be doing our best to keep the levels as low as possible because they are so harmful to our ecosystems. But otherwise, hunters and conservationists often have the same, goals of good land management.
Awesome. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Walter.
And
That's all
I
the
guess
questions.
so. What's that? So I think we're at 1 o'clock, and so we probably have to close it down. But I think this has been a really productive conversation. I really appreciate, Athena, Rob, Danny, and Walter for attending and for answering so many questions. And especially Walter, I will say thank you so much for having, your kind of our institutional knowledge transfer here. I really appreciate all your knowledge and experience and your presentation. And I just wanted to encourage anyone watching who is interested in land management reviews, you can send me an email. My email is on our website. It's terrariakeepers@fnps.org. We are looking for people who are interested in attending land management reviews and who have the time and knowledge and ability to do that. And we actually have kind of a deficit of reviewers in the Naples region, especially. So if you are in that region, we are really looking for reviewers who can fill those roles. And otherwise, I'm really grateful that FNPS has this opportunity to attend and be the voice for Florida's ecosystems and our public land management. So.
And anyone is welcome to use my PowerPoint to make a presentation at a chapter meeting or something. You can send me an email on our ICSIA chapter website. Just use the contact form. Just send me your email address, and you can shorten it. You can modify. You can do whatever you want to. And if you are an experienced land management reviewer and enjoy doing them, do try to get some other people from your chapter involved as backups if for no other reason.
Yeah, you could bring them on as an observer.
Right.
And another thing we talked about in the forum that we hosted recently is after you attend a land management review, the next chapter meeting that you go to, if you could stand up and just let your chapter know that you just during the announcement section, let your chapter know you attended this land management review, a little bit about why we do them and how it went, because I think it's really important for the rest of our members to kind of be more informed about land management reviews and get involved.
Great. And so just a final word, we have our next Lunch and Learn at the end of August, last Friday of August, and it will be Lily, Charisse, I, and Paul Schmalzer discussing pertinent science, native plant updates, ecology from mostly the state of Florida. So join us next month, and I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.